So now let's move away from the plight of Nigerian prisoners abroad to the continental agenda, bearing in mind that the AU will be celebrating its Golden Jubilee anniversary, and also the 21st Ordinary Summit of the African Union will be coming up in Addis Ababa, and the theme is African Renaissance and Pan-Africanism. How relevant is this theme?
That Pan-Africanism and Renaissance is just a rehash of what has occurred in the past. If you remember the Osajeve Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, that was his theme, Pan-Africanism. And later, if I could recall, the OAU was then known as OAU, did something about Renaissance in the mid-80s. So what I see now is that the AU is readopting the theme, having realized that all attempts so far has achieved nothing or has been a failure. But the present environment is such that it could be achieved, because when it was first mentioned by leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, we were struggling with colonialism, apartheid. All those have disappeared now. What Africa is facing now is turning the states into nation states within their borders.
But now, looking at the theme African Renaissance and Pan-Africanism, does it make sense to chart this agenda, bearing in mind the trade restrictions that we have within the continent and the barriers? Going to South Africa alone is almost like passing through the eye of the needle. And also talking about the economic restrictions, the volume of trade within Africa is just 10%. But when we consider the volume of trade between African countries and the West, we discover that we cannot compare these two sides.
And these are the problems that Pan-Africanism wanted to solve. Pan-Africanism connotes the decision to encourage unity, enhance economic relations between the states, and promote greater political understanding between states in Africa. And if you remember that we now have regional groupings, sub-regional groupings, such as the ECOWAS, that has been doing something to enhance unity in this West African sub-region. You have SADC in Southern Africa that is doing the same thing. You have the Great Lake region, and you have the East Africa. So they are trying to coalesce what is being done in these sub-regions into a continental level activity.
Many people have called this AU agenda more of a lip service and a talking shop, bearing in mind that the legal document necessary to ratify this protocol has not been signed. The Executive Council would rather maintain their reservation in signing this document into law. That's talking about the Pan-African Parliament.
Yes, because now, 2004 to now, it's about 9 years. And don't forget that that move has the danger of supranationalism. I mean, imposing African nationalism onto the different African states. We have not reached that stage in which African countries will surrender their sovereignty to one supra-continental body.
If Africa is not ripe enough for the Pan-African Parliament, for an oversight function to be given to the Pan-African Parliament, how would it be ripe for Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance?
Well, Pan-Africanism is the road we are now trekking. When we shall get to the destination, I cannot predict that. But the fact that we are back to recognizing that Pan-Africanism and Renaissance is very important. That means the resurgence of the feeling of the 80s in this century is a hope that our people are yearning for unity We want to be like EU. We want to be like Organization of American States. You see that these bodies have institutions that are very effective. And this is why Africans are looking for that. We were to have this African Economic Union under the Lagos Plan of Action. In 1962, there was a feeling that we should move towards economic union. But we've not been able to actually integrate at sub-regional level. So until we solve sub-regional problems, it is then we can go for the continental level.
So let's look at the question of political will in driving home this agenda. Now, just making a reference to the last African Union Summit where the theme was boosting intra-African trade, what we could see was the election of the chairperson coming and the front burner, and the main agenda that made all the African leaders together was relegated to the backstage.
Well, with regard to the election of the OAU chairman, you must have read about Nigerians' attitude and what happened at the AU summit. You see, election, whether local or global, involve lobbying and a lot of underhand. Some even use inducement to get people to their side. And in that election, Nigerians' behavior was perfect. You know, the average Nigerian believes that Nigeria must have everything. They don't ever think that Nigeria is just one of 52 or 53 countries that form the AU. So, what's happened, though you may think it overshadowed every other thing that they were supposed to have done at that summit, but with this Pan-Africanism and Renaissance coming up, that will show you that it was, you may say it was overshadowed, but I see it as being kept at bay for discussion at future appropriate conducive environment, which is what is happening now.
Now, given Nigeria's stance at that particular summit, would you say Nigeria's influence is dwindling in the international frontier?
No, I disagree with you. That again is attitudinal problem of Nigerians. We believe that as self-styled giant, we should be everywhere. What Nigeria is doing is to ensure that she does not behave like a drunken bull in a China store. We take calculated steps. We look at the future, that we do things that will not injure our national interest. You see, in the international level, you need other countries. And we are not a hegemon. Nigeria has not got the means to be a hegemon. So, people talk of carrot and stick. But I see it as inducements and bullying. But we are not yet at that stage. When we get to that stage, maybe people will recognize our leadership more. We are leaders. If you look at the history of Nigerian activities in the United Nations, within the OAU and AU system, Nigerian leadership is there because everybody listens to Nigeria and everybody wants to know what Nigeria is going to do. You see? So, in fact, after the colonization and apartheid, don't be surprised if I say that the question in Africa is Nigeria. Because Nigeria's position is so strategic geopolitically.
Let's move over to one area you've had a robust hands-on experience and that's talking about you being an international observer in so many African countries. You were in Ghana, you were in Sierra Leone, and so many countries. And now let's look at the challenges of deepening democratic institutions in this country. How would you rate the conduct of elections in African countries recently?
Actually, we should congratulate ourselves. Let me start from home, West Africa. Election was held in Sierra Leone with perfect results. No crisis thereafter. No post-election crisis. The same thing was repeated in Ghana. So, in West Africa, we are progressive with regard to democratic practices. In East Africa too is progressive. You mentioned Kenya. Can you compare the post-election situation of the last election to the previous one? The previous one led to explosion, conflicts, fightings. But this one, though there is challenge, but it is legal challenge. There is no fighting on the streets. So Africa is progressing towards becoming fully democratized in our way of organizing ourselves within our communities and states.
But how would you say the introduction of the biometric system, this has brought in a different dimension entirely in elections, bearing in mind that this is almost causing a very serious ripples in the just concluded Kenya's election, where about 300,000 biometric machines failed to deliver results?
I think it's just a technical problem. If I could remind you, the election that brought former President Bush into office had a similar problem doing a smaller scale in Florida. So it's a technical problem that cannot have any major impact on subsequent elections in Africa, because these technical problems now are being recognized and I'm sure are being rectified. So I think it is even better because the vote is electorally counted. There's no question of somebody, you say he sniped the ballot box, I went to stop it somewhere and bring it back. I think we are progressing. I prefer it, that we keep on using the system for elections.
So now let's take a move to look at the challenges of conflict resolution, the rising wave of conflict within the Africa sub-region, making reference to what's happening in Central African Republic, where the constitution has been suspended by the Saleko rebels, and also the Malian intervention story coming up with some ugly dimensions and untold stories, and also the $5 million ransom placed on Kone.
I wish to start by pointing out that so many African states are yet to evolve into national states. Most of our countries are a conglomeration of people with different cultures, outlook, and diverse interests. So until our political leadership could weld our people together through good governance, we continue to have this problem. What is called conflict? Conflict has two sides: justice, power. Let's say any given society in Africa, those who think they are majority, they lord it over the so-called minority. The minority thinks they are being denied of their rights by this majority group. Now that's a question of justice.
That takes us to the international justice system, bearing in mind the happenings in Bakassi and the dimensions this Bakassi issue has taken so far, and also the International Criminal Court, the Bosco Ntaganda surrendering himself to the International Court of Justice, and the accusation that the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court in Hague, has been selective in its prosecution.
Let me start from home. Bakassi is a foregone conclusion. Nigeria has acquiesced to the judgment of the International Court of Justice. Legally, it is irreversible. What we owe our people is to resettle them somewhere in Nigeria.
Ambassador Aderenle, it's been a wonderful moment, bringing some amazing insight, particularly the plight of Nigerian prisoners abroad and also the issue of conflict management in Africa. Thank you very much for being a part of this edition of Network.